好啦，咁已經夠。
We have a quorum. I call the meeting to order. First of all, confirmation of minutes of meeting. Paper number CB record 4635/13 to 14 is the minutes of minutes of the special meeting on the 27th of January, and there is also the minutes of meeting on the 18th March 2014. They've been given to members, and so far the Secretariat has not received any proposals for amendments. If that is the case, I ask members to endorse these 2 minutes. Thank you. Second item, information papers issued since the last meeting. You will find the details on the agenda. I'm not going to read them out. Items for discussion at the next meeting. The next meeting will be on Monday, on the 9th of June 2014 at 4:30. There are 2 items proposed. First is the 4th Information Technology Education Strategy. The administration planned to seek funding approval in July. That's why they would like to have a discussion on this item in June. The second one is also an item proposed by the administration, is a review of the new senior secondary curriculum and assessment. Members would like to discuss the existing policy and program on the redevelopment of primary and secondary schools and special schools. I have discussed with the Deputy Chairman, and we would like to discuss this item in the regular meeting in June as well. Under ROP 83A, if members have any direct or indirect pecuniary interest related to any items under discussions, members should disclose the nature of the interest. Let's start the first discussion item. This is policy on small class teaching in primary schools and issues related to increasing the number of students allocated to each primary 1 class. Members, you have given the indication to speak. Let's invite the administration to join us. Well, we'll also invite deputations and individuals to join us. We'll have with us the Secretary for Education, Mr. Eddie Ng, Ms. Jessie Wong, Deputy Secretary for Education, and Ms. Yip Ling Bik, Principal Assistant Secretary. Perhaps you would like to hurry them along? Perhaps you can maybe hurry them along. Open the back door for them if they're coming in that way. Members who would like to speak, maybe give us your indication now. Please be seated. I welcome representatives of the administration, deputations, and individuals. We're here to listen to the views on policy on small class teaching in primary schools and issues related to increasing the number of students allocated to each primary 1 class. You may use the earpiece and choose the channels you would like to listen to. Channel 1 is the floor, Channel 2 is English, and Channel 1 is Cantonese, and Channel 0 is the floor. 9 members have indicated that they would attend, and the submissions have already been received by members and the administration. I'd like to remind deputations and individuals that what you say is not protected under the Legislative Council Powers and Privileges Ordinance. Well, you will find in front of you a notice to security issued to individuals attending LegCo meetings or listening in the public gallery. And it has also been served attached to the letter sent to you. If you would like to get a copy, you may get one from security staff members. First, I will ask the Secretary for Education to start with a few remarks, and then I will ask you to take your turns to speak. You won't have more than 3 minutes each. When you hear the bell, you will have to stop. Please be precise. Secretary, I thank everyone for attending to express your views. We fully understand the views you express and the concern you express when it comes to allocation of primary 1 class. Every year, because of the student population and also factors related to SchoolNet, there may be some uncertainties. We reckon that in 2016-17 to 2018-19, there would be a peak. Thereafter, it will drop to a stable level. In order to to meet the changes year on year, we introduce a flexibility in the allocation of primary 1 school places, including making use of vacant classrooms, borrowing school places from neighboring school nets, changing use of other rooms to additional classrooms. When necessary, we would also temporarily allocate more students to each P1 class. Starting from 2009 and 10, and there was the small class teaching. We have already expect the need for adjustments, and there are 36 school nets for primary 1 in order to allocate school places to primary 1 students and to create a favorable study and learning environment, and to ensure development and sustaining operation of schools. We have put in place a number of measures. I will first listen to your views before I respond. I will first ask Mr. Leung Siu Tong, Chairman of the Hong Kong Aided Primary School Heads Association, to speak. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, and I thank the Secretary for his opening remark. We have a number of views we would like to express. Small class teaching is something advocated by the administration, is welcomed by teachers and schools, because this will enhance the efficiency of teaching at schools. So we do not object to increasing the number of allocation to primary 1 class places, because this runs counter to the small class teaching policy, and this goes counter to the expectations of schools and parents. Since the administration has already implemented small class teaching for a number of years, if for these reasons this policy is to be abandoned and we see that the administration is only tackling the symptom, then it will not be favorable. Now they also advocate electronic learning. We think that there is a great need for small class teaching. For the 5 school nets, there should not be increase of the number of students allocated to P1 class. And we also see that there are a number of schools near these 5 school nets shrinking the size of their class. So why don't you consider borrowing school places from these neighboring school nets so that these schools who would otherwise have to shrink their class size will also benefit? And over the years, because of the change in population in different districts, and sometimes there is an asymmetric school class structure. Some of them are quite inflated. And this brings uncertainty to the school environment. Say, for example, the use of venues, classrooms, allocation of teaching resources.
I think most schools would not like to have enlarged P1 class. Number 4, of course, I understand that it's not a science to predict the number of classes required by each district. However, even if you take temporary measures, you should have effective communication with the headmasters and headmistresses in the districts. And number 5, of course, type 2 babies have an impact on the increase or decrease in population, but then housing planning is also a factor. In certain districts, there are too many schools, and therefore there is competition among schools for students, and in certain districts there is no complement of facilities, and so there is a lack of school places. I think the Education Bureau has not communicated effectively with other bureaus, and therefore there is this imbalance. We believe the administration should review the relevant policies and also the number of schools in each district and future planning as well as communication with the sector. Thank you. Second, Mr. Sham Yeo Kwang, Principal of FDBWA Chao Chin Yao School. Good afternoon, Chairman, members and officials. I am a headmaster in a Tuen Mun primary school. I agree that in September 2009 there was the introduction of small class teaching. However, in that year in Tuen Mun there was a surplus of school places. On average, for every 10 P1 class places, there were only 7 students, and the Education Department allowed certain schools to continue with large class teaching, and you did not carry out the small class teaching. I find that mind-boggling. And then until this scholastic year, when cross-boundary students continued to come into Tuen Mun, the problem of surplus of school places was relieved. According to the ED's statistics, in the next few years, there would be a continuous increase of students of the right age cohort for Tuen Mun, and there would be a lack of school places. And the ED is poised to take different temporary measures in order to tackle this transient or interim demand. I personally think that is reasonable. However, my worry is starting from the beginning of 2013, there was a 0 delivery quota for type 2 births. And we could see that from 2019-20, there would be a sharp decrease in the number of children seeking a P1 class. My own feeling is that the drop would be much greater than the estimation done by the ED. By that time, Tuen Mun primary schools would again face the situation like 10 years ago, the cutting of classes, cutting of teaching places, and even an entire school could be done away with. And there would be dampening of staff morale to a very large extent, and also the quality of teaching. In order to minimize the impact in the next 5 years, I would say that when we seek to increase places now, we should try to think of things or measures that could be turned back, like we can use vacant school premises, vacant classrooms, and also the last resort should be an increase in P1 class numbers, because these could be turned back. When there is a lower demand for places in the district, we can immediately suspend the relevant temporary measures and then reinstate those measures. Unless we have accurate figures to support that, starting from 2019, we would still have a deficiency of places in Tuen Mun. We should not increase the number of schools or classrooms in Tuen Mun because, first of all, that is a waste of public money, and secondly, there will be vicious competition amongst the schools. If there will be enough primary school places in Tuen Mun, I would hope that there would be small class teaching for the entire of Tuen Mun. Thank you. Next, Mr. Hong Wai Shing, Headmaster of SKH Tin Shui Wai Ling Oi Primary School. Thank you, Chairman. The two colleagues said that the enlargement of P1 class size should be the last resort. I agree with that. I'm also interested in saying that the support measures for larger P1 class are actually stifling or killing off small class teaching. You provide large class resources in order to tackle the extra numbers. You are not applying the small class teaching principle. I would like to make this clear. In 2009, the ED paper said that the ED would have the prerogative to increase class size, but then that paper was silent on how the resources would be calculated when there would be a bigger P1 class. That paper did not say that you would use large class size resource calculation. Well, I hope you will still provide resources on the basis of 25 a class, because in the 2009 paper, some schools opted for large classes, but now schools have no choice but are compelled to accept more students into P1 classes. They would like to have small class teaching, however, you compel them to have large class sizes and you provide them with resources on that basis. That is not reasonable. If schools do that voluntarily, then you can calculate resources on that large class size level. However, if this is dumped on to schools, you should still use small class teaching resources for them. And then in that discussion paper, I like to ask some questions. Like in para 9, it says that the parallel class structure does not apply to public schools. I think this is so worrying because this temporary measure is not going to be for a long time, but just for 6 years. But then we can imagine before those 6 years expire, they may go back to the mainland. If you say you do not provide for symmetrical class structure, you say this is not a public school policy, then we can imagine when these large classes are promoted, they will still be large classes and you will lack classrooms, and in the end you will have only one P1 or P2 classes. However, parents would still like to go to these schools, and if you do not apply the symmetrical class structure principle, there will be a lot of chaos and you will not be able to satisfy the demand of all parents. I would like, therefore, the Education Bureau to clarify. I have been in the sector for 30 years. I have never heard that a symmetrical class structure does not apply to public primary schools. On the contrary, for these public-funded schools, there must be the opportunity for balanced participation by the sector. And when you use public money, you should not just look at the demand in the market. You should allow all schools to continue operation. Next, Dr. Feng Waiwa, President of the Hong Kong PTU. Thank you, Chairman. The small class policy has been established. We must reiterate that principle. It is an established policy. However, in primary schools, only about 75% of them go for small class size. Some schools cannot do it because of certain constraints. So the premise is a small class is the policy. If you turn that into a large class, that is a contravention of the policy. You must have very powerful explanation and sufficient reason before you want to do that. The Bureau Secretary will say there is a big increase in the age cohort for P1 and this is only transient and therefore you have sufficient reason to put in this temporary measure. However, we believe that the policy principle must be abided by. Secondly, we would ask, when we can preserve the advantages of small class teaching, when batches and batches of students can benefit from small class teaching, then on that premise we can think of ways and means to tackle the situation. But now you jump to that step immediately and go for a large class size. I think it's all right. for you to discuss with us whether it should be 26, 27, 28, but then you jump to 30 altogether at once, and then for Tin Shui Wai it will even be 31. You are thinking of resources. And if this is a large class, then you would only provide the manpower contingent on the basis of large class size. Now, if normally there are 25 students in a class, if you put in more than 25 students, there should be another class. If there is an extra class, there will be a totally different picture in terms of manpower planning and deployment. And this is not just a resource problem. Why should we ask students of a few years to be deprived of small class teaching just because of resource considerations? We have to think about what other ways and means we can use. We are advocating the use of vacant classrooms in order to operate an extra class, and so students can still learn in a small class. If you do not have classrooms, then we can start to think about having a larger class size. I think this time around you have shown quite some disrespect to the sector. Why are there so many headmasters and principals here? Why did we mount a signature campaign? Because you circumvented the process of consultation with schools. Actually, many schools do not like the present proposal, and that is why they are here today. So, Secretary, you have to really talk to the sector and do better planning instead of allowing us to be victims of messed up policy. Next, Ms. Chen Choi Chan, Principal of Lambton Methodist Primary School. Thank you, Chairman, Bureau Secretary and members. In the past 2 years, we saw what happened in Tuen Mun and the North District. As a primary school head in Kwun Tong, we could see that there are structural population increase problems. In November 2013, there were 32 public primary schools in Kwun Tong which formed themselves into a follow-up or P1 place allocation follow-up group. There were 5 headmasters who were representatives and helping to communicate with the Bureau. We were asking the Bureau to provide population information in Kwun Tong early so we could come up with effective means to tackle the situation. The Bureau told us then that they would actually enlarge the class size. All the 32 headmasters and headmistresses stressed one thing: no matter what proposal you would adopt, you must protect the small class teaching policy and also preserve quality of teaching. On the 31st of March 2014, you replied us in a letter to say that you would take a flexible approach, and that was your basic principle all along, that you would go to use vacant classrooms and also modify other rooms to be used as classrooms. But then, in the 2014 guideline, it is said that school nets 46 and 48 of Kwun Tong, there will be these execution guidelines, that in Kwun Tong there were no surplus classrooms, and there would not be other rooms which could be converted into classrooms to cater to P1 allocation. I must clarify and stress one fact. In Kwun Tong, that is actually not the case. It is not that all 32 schools did not have surplus classrooms, so that there would not be other rooms that could be modified into classrooms. I remember on the 12th of March 2014, the 32 schools met with the Bureau, and I myself said that we should consult every school so we could flexibly use surplus classrooms to continue with small class teaching. Just take my school as an example, and I also said that on that occasion. There are 5 P1 classes, but we have 38 classrooms. And of course, there is an increase in population in Kwun Tong, and we would really like to cooperate with the Bureau and administration in order to tie out the storm. And we said that 1 or 2 standard rooms, which would be in the size of a standard classroom, so we could operate 2 more P1 classes with 25 students in each. So we could still have small class teaching and preserve the quality of education. But then on the 23rd of April, there was a second letter from the Bureau saying that there would be the target of 30 students in P1 classes. I was so disappointed. I would urge the administration to make the best use of resources by using surplus classrooms and preserve class size at 25. Thank you very much. Ms. Lam Pik Chu, Chairperson of Yuen Long Primary School Heads Association, Chairman Mr. Eddie Ng, members and colleagues. Good afternoon. I represent Yuen Long Primary School Heads. We strongly ask that we have a continuous development of the small class teaching policy. Yuen Long District is special. We understand that from 2014 to 2018, we would see a peak of deficiency of P1 places. We understand that our school has the responsibility to coordinate with the Bureau in order to come up with a reasonable way to tie out this transient period. We are happy to help tackle the problem, but then the Bureau should be attentive to one point. Small class teaching is our aspiration, and hopefully when you calculate resources, you make use of the small class teaching policy to calculate resources so that students will not stand to lose.
We hope that schools will flexibly deploy resources to achieve effective teaching. And I would like to talk about policy. Do they have long-term planning, say 3 years, 5 years on the part of the Education Bureau? We see that in the coming 6 years there will be huge changes upwards and downwards in student population. Will there be a task force responsible for communicating directly with the sector and for us to reflect our views to them? Students are users. We are frontline workers. If Bureau, you just look at it from one-dimensional perspective, it will be of no use. For each school, in each school net, in each district, the situation is different. For some, there may be additional classrooms erected. For others, they may have to convert more special rooms. So you should not have an across-the-board approach. You will have to take into account the different situations in different schools. When it comes to P1 intake, we will have to make sure that all students will be given a school place. But when the student population drops, what about the surplus school places? And what about the surplus teachers? 10 years ago, Yuen Long was hard hit. 16 schools disappear as a result of school closures and reduction of class size. We don't want to see that happening again. We're all very concerned that this may happen one more time. I hope that the panel members please continue to follow this up. Don't forget about us after today. Don't keep us waiting. Thank you. Next. Dr. Zhang Yufeng, Vice President, Hong Kong Society of Small Class Teaching. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Our society is made up of a group of enthusiasts, teachers, principals, and academics. Starting from 2004, some of us have started using small class teaching. There has been a positive impact on the education of Hong Kong as a result of small class teaching. We put our students first. We have our people-oriented management. We foster an integrated learning environment. We focus on the quality of learning. We also advocate autonomy in teaching. With a small class, teachers can spend more time with each student to take care of their emotional development, their learning requirements, to encourage more participation from students, and to put in place different and more effective pedagogy. And on top of that, more feedback can be given to students to foster growth. In a small class teaching environment, students will get more attention and support from their classmates and teachers. They have more time to participate in class, to develop their social skills, and achieve a sense of satisfaction. When it comes to professional development, with small class teaching, teachers are given more room to participate in professional development. They can forge their own network. They can improve the education ecology. You can see that small class teaching is conducive to enhancing the quality of education here. We've always taught our students that you have to persevere. If small class teaching is beneficial to our education system, we should persevere. So we earnestly hope that the administration will implement small class teaching. That it should be continued so that it will benefit society and education. Next, Ms. Ka Lai, Chairman of the Tuen Mun District Primary Heads Association. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm from Tuen Mun. As you know that cross-boundary student does not just come up today. In dealing with this problem, the Education Bureau was not forward-looking. They did not have a vision, and they have forgotten about the precious experience of teachers. When there are drastic changes, upwards or downwards, with the student population, we've all along tried to cope with it, and we have worked to our bones. There has been school closures, reduction in classes, teachers being dismissed. This has greatly damaged us. We see that nowadays there is a huge increase in the number of cross-boundary students. We see that in the next school there are more classes added. We thought that we could be given a respite. However, because of the poor planning of the Education Bureau, there is a difference of 26 classes between the provisional number of places under the central allocation and the actual number. So where we are supposed to have a 4 class, but there is a difference of 2 classes in the end. This has greatly damaged our school. You know that this in turn will damage the morale of our teaching force and in turn affect the teaching and learning in our school. Just look at our society today. Who doesn't care about the underprivileged? We have the community care fund and various support programs. How come that when it comes to schools in crisis, there is no support given to them? And on top of that, you deal them a severe blow. Well, it seems that the Education Bureau just stick to the old policy with no flexibility. They require certain schools to receive more with more students, whereas for others there is a danger of further reduction in classes. What happened in Tuen Mun will happen in Yuen Long. We don't have a symmetrical class structure. We don't have parent choices. We don't have sufficient resources. We are frontline workers. There is nothing we can do. All we can do is just sit there and see it happening in different districts. In the paper, you see in paragraph 3 that the Education Bureau understands that there are uncertainties. Hence, there should be some provisional policies. How come they cannot be more flexible? They put in place some makeshift measures. They have forgotten about the needs of different schools. Your time is up. Last deputation is Mr. Law Lai Yin, Principal of Kamel Leung Sing Tech School. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm not going to repeat what has been said, but I would like to expound on the following points. First, according to Notice 19/2008, paragraph 3, it says that when it comes to implementation of special measures, the Bureau will continue with the existing policies and, if necessary, discuss with schools. And it seems that the communication is only in the form of making an announcement, and then we will have to implement it. And when it comes to consultation, we're just left there hanging. Starting from 2009, when small class teaching was put in place, this is the 5th year, and in 2014 September, those the P1 students will become P6 students. When it comes to the design and the use of small class teaching, we have got more familiar with it. We've grown conversant with it, and we have seen how beneficial this is to the entire environment. If you change it again, then we will have to make adjustments again. And can you tell us whether it will benefit us or not? With small class teaching, every student has a lot of opportunities to participate. If you expand the class, well, I'm sure you will know how much participation each student will get to do. When it comes to special circumstance, you should be flexible, and I'm sure we will find that acceptable. You should put in place more manpower resources and other resources. So schools teaching using small class teaching will be able to cope when they're required to expand their classes. So that the quality of teaching will be maintained. Otherwise, we know that the quality of teaching will definitely suffer. It was a policy announced in the policy address in 2008 when it comes to small class teaching. I believe that the policy remains unchanged. However, the implementing bureau, the education bureau, should put in place measures that are conducive to the implementation of small class teaching. However, what we see, all these administrative measures. How much longer do you need? Please finish it. There is no long-term planning, and they have neglected the impact on the quality of small class teaching, and they have not attached enough importance to small class teaching. Okay, all deputations have spoken. Secretary, would you like to respond to what was said by deputations? Thank you. I thank deputations for their valuable views. I would like to quickly respond to 3 points, and I will maybe give further details in answer to members' questions. First, I'd like to say that small class teaching is pedagogy. And starting from 2008 and 2009, it became our policy, and this remains unchanged to date. A number of deputations said that they understand that there may be changes in student population and there should be flexibility, and they have come up with some possible measures. This is also within the scope of the policy. The policy itself remains unchanged, and I would like to emphasize that we would like to deal with it in a pragmatic manner. You all understand the transient nature of the change. There is a consensus, and this takes us to the next part. Manpower deployment. You will see that this doesn't run counter to our policy. Say, for example, in the past few years, in the North District, we have maintained the same policy. We understand that there may be an impact on the quality of education with an increase in number of allocations. So we use a basis of 25, and we will increase manpower if it's increased to 30 or above. We have to maintain the efficiency of teaching. And of course, we would like to communicate with you more. There has been a lot of discussions in this regard. A number of deputations mentioned about discussions on this point. Members expressed another concern, and I identify with that. Yes, in the coming years that there will be an increase in student population, and thereafter there will be a drop, and even a sharp one. That's why we have these provisional measures to deal with this transient change. These are my responses. Thank you. Now I open the floor for questions and comments and discussions. We may not have time for the second round, and then for the first round, I see some hands. I'll read their names out. I think I'll have to extend the meeting by 15 minutes. We're supposed to finish at 5:50. I don't think we'll have enough time for all questions. I'll read out names. Wong Kok Hing, Deputy Chairman; Kenneth Chan; Starry Lee, Kok Him; Lang Yu Chung; Lang Kwok Hong; Regina Ip; Helena Wong; Peter Zhang; Wu Chi Wai; Priscilla Leung; Dennis Kwok. No, that should be Fernando Zhang, and then Dennis Kwok and Lam Tai Fai, who is the chairman. 16 altogether. Even if I give 3 minutes each, we would overrun. Well, maybe for now I will just extend it by 15 minutes. I have to extend the meeting now. Members, if you are showing some placard, maybe you can sit higher, or you just put your placard lower, because I can't see you.
That will be better because you're in the way of the camera lens and also myself. If you need a reply from the deputations or the secretary, please do not use up your 3 minutes. Mr. Wong Kwok Hing. Chairman, I'd like to thank the 9 deputations from the education sector for coming to express their views. I'm aware that they have asked a common question, and that is they actually criticize the administration for the lack of consultation, for not talking to them. I think that was the main question asked. Secondly, I'm aware that the deputations said that they would be very happy to help the administration solve the population peak issue, and they also made the following points. First, whether we should make use of the vacant classrooms and vacant school premises as much as possible. And secondly, do you really want to go to 30 at one go? Why can't you go for just 26 or 27? And number 3, why can't we make use of school places available in the district nearby? And also, why do you not calculate resources on the small class policy? They asked 4 questions. Now, why is it that those steps represented by the questions had not been taken? Could I ask those 2 questions first? Mr. Secretary, you have up to 1.5 minutes to answer. Thank you for the question. First, I'd like to stress that indeed discussion took place in every district. I will defer to the DS for giving you the details. Ms. Wong, well, let me supplement 1 point. Mr. Wong asked 4 questions, but then in fact we dealt with all those. Ms. Wong, Chairman, we actually talked to schools in the districts where the impact would be great in November, when we knew from the registration of the discretionary places admission stage, we knew the situation, and in October we would issue the choice of schools list for central allocation. But that was only an estimate. According to the registration number of the discretionary places admission stage, we would do the estimate. But then some parents might not have got the school they preferred in that stage, and still they would not go for POA in the central allocation stage. So we would have to wait till January when we would have a more solid figure before we would talk to schools. The figure will change because the parents have different ideas. I have very little time. Can you promise that you would actually sit down and consult and discuss with the sector? Can you give that undertaking? Chairman, we absolutely certainly will be happy to do it. We have been doing that and will do it in the future. Mr. Ip Kin Yun, Deputy Chairman. Chairman, I'd like to make the demand of Mr. Wong Kwok Heng again, and that is, can we now do a better job because the headmasters have said that you have not done your consultation properly? Secretary, you have not really done consultation. DS, we are talking about POA for 2014. I think the sector knows the timetable very well. Parents have already submitted their choices and no big change should take place. By beginning of June, we would have to go to the next stage. I think you have answered your question. Next question. Well, it doesn't matter. The POA will not be affected. You can start your work again, like the issue on resources. Should you calculate it on the basis of a 30 a class structure or the small class teaching policy? So you give them the resources they should have, instead of giving them fewer resources in the process. Who would take the question? Secretary. Let me answer the question. I will stress again that no matter what resources we are talking about, we have to know whether we have an established policy for it. We do. In the past 3 years, in the North District, we carried out that policy. Whether it be 26, 27, 28, it's all right. But why we would add one assistant primary school master or mistress to do it, there is a policy for it. Well, actually, many headmasters have talked about this. Well, the North District measure was a temporary measure. Why would it become the basis for a long-term policy? If the North District approach was not good enough, why shouldn't you review it and improve upon it? When you suddenly jump from 25 to 30, it means that either you go for a small class teaching or a big class teaching, and you do not allow the class size to be 26, 27, or 28. Why is that so? Did you review the North District approach and whether it should be kept? DS? Let me supplement. We are not talking about following the North District example. What happened in the North District was that, in fact, there was a lot of discussion when small class teaching was mooted. In the panel then, in 2008, it was said that there should not be a broad brush approach in promoting small class teaching because there was imbalance in certain districts. And schools and parents might have different considerations, so they would not like to go for small class teaching immediately. And then some schools were happy to do it, but because of supply and demand, they could not do it at that moment. Well, I hope other members will follow up with this question. I hope the policy will continue. Next, Mr. Kenneth Chan. Chairman, this is really some major thing. I thought the small class teaching policy was a solid policy, that it should be an expression of a principle. 25 should be 25. Why is it that now it can become so flexible that the Bureau could find a way to boost it to 30 and then ask people to not to shout so loudly against it? I think what is more magical is that the Secretary is saying that small class teaching has nothing to do with the figure, but it's just a methodology. And you seem to be saying that even if the class size shoots up to 30, the methodology could still be carried out. But Bureau Secretary, you are the Secretary. Don't you know that there is a relationship between the principle, the methodology, and the figure? And also there is a communication problem. These 9 headmasters should have remained in their schools and discharge their duties, and yet they are here at the panel to express their views to us. Is communication that complicated? Now people are telling different stories. Kwun Tong is telling us that they have vacant classrooms, but the administration is saying that they don't. Why are we ending up with this scenario? The administration has said there is communication, but what kind of communication has been conducted? Frankly, today, here you are here to listen and also to speak up. But if the Secretary does not seek to a personal understanding into the situation in Kwun Tong and Yuen Long, and you just read from papers and then satisfy yourself that small class teaching has nothing to do with the figure, then you are negligent of duty. You are not an accountability official. Secretary, a bigger number definitely has an impact on the teaching methodology. Is that your question? Yes, I'm asking him whether he understands the issue. Secretary, I thank you for the question. 2 points. The policy was not made by me. It was not made by me. On the 13th of May, 2011, the then Undersecretary said in this panel that after consultation, he knew that there could not be a broad brush approach, and therefore there were two scenarios. Those who were ready, those with the right conditions, and if it was acceptable to all, then they should go for a class size of 25, and the others should go for a class of 30. So 25 and 30 are both within the present policy. And I'm worried whether it is quite right to describe these class sizes as small and large. Secondly, small class teaching is not just well, in fact, I talked to many schools and I also went to different schools myself. I think what is more important is that we actually discussed the matter with both local and overseas universities, and I can tell you that small class teaching is not a mechanical reference just for the figures. Next, Ms. Darili. Chairman, I'd like to thank the deputations for coming to LegCo to speak. Secretary. Yes, there might be some communication, but then it's quite obvious today that the deputations are telling us that in certain school nets, they are quite unhappy to have the figure change from 25 to 30, and they have their worries. I think this is not a small thing, and I hope you will respond with caution. I think the deputations are concerned that this would not be just a temporary measure as expressed by the paper. As you know, the lack of kindergarten places will be translated into lack of P1 class places as well. So, Bureau Secretary, you really have to act with caution, because my assessment is that this is not a minor matter. My own assessment is that it will be very difficult for this particular year. Maybe you should look at schools in those 5 school nets where the class size has to be expanded. You should try to see how you can help them with resources. Because if you are talking about 4 classes and 5 more in a school, that means 20 students, and that is no small addition to a school. I think you should do some school-based assessment, and that would help with the quality of teaching. I hope you will do that in the short term. But as to the roller coaster kind of figures that we are going to see, I think you will have to apply more thinking to it. The primary school net is going to be small, but with the development in our transport network, and also if the school nets have been decided many years ago, I think parents just do not mind going to a nearby school. It's just that you constrain them to a particular school net. I think you should give priority to making use of surplus places and vacant classrooms in the same district. You should seek to exhaust those resources before you think of enlarging the class size. Can you promise that you will continue to liaise with the schools and increase the resources for the short term, and then not repeat what you are doing by suddenly descending more students in the schools before other resources are exhausted? Secretary. Thank you for that question, Ms. Lee. I'd like to emphasize one point. Amongst the districts, I can give you an example. After our discussion, the school would not like to go to another district for places. They would rather for the schools to be banded together. Which district I should not tell you. I have to seek their view before I can divulge the information. So this goes to show that we did not dictate it. There was a lot of discussion. And I understand the deputations would know that there was such a process. Next, Mr. Ip Kwok Him. Thank you, Chairman. Let's welcome the education sector representatives for coming to speak to us. Small class teaching, I believe, is embraced by society, because if you have smaller class, there would be better care for each student. I remember with regard to the class size, what should be called a small class, I think there was some controversy. Basically, we used the figure 25. And now you say you want to add to that class size. At present, if the class size is boosted, you may have to solve other problems. And in the process, you have to be careful, because if you are going to add more people to the classes, you have to be mindful of future developments, because the reverse trend can visit us, and then you may have to dismiss teachers and also close schools. Many sector representatives are saying you should increase the resources. Can you do that specifically for this transitional period? In other words, can you give them more resources? And also, do you have a more accurate grasp of the fluctuating student population? If you know that the trend is on the increase in the long term, then you should increase class numbers. But then can you give me more information in detail, please?
I would like to defer to the Assistant Secretary, the Deputy Secretary. When it comes to planning, as reflected in the document, according to the Census and Statistics a student population projection, that's also got the information from information in different districts. There are two reasons why there is an increase in such population. One, type 2 babies. They may not be cross-boundary students. We're concerned about this because type 2 babies may settle in Hong Kong. And previously, the CNS department said that the assumption of the survey was that half of the type 2 babies will return to Hong Kong before the age of 21. And that's why for some other districts there is an increase in number. And the second factor is the year of the dragon. In 2012, there were more babies born. And in 2018-19, they will become P1 students. That's why there is a drop after that. Next, Mr. Leung Yiu Chung. Well, when the population drops, you cut class or close schools. When it increases, you just allocate more students. It's very easy to do the job of the Education Bureau. There is no principle whatsoever. No wonder the popularity rating of the secretary is so low. And you said that, well, it's not the case that you did not talk to them. You did, but in what form? That is the usual practice of the Bureau Secretary. He just went to the districts, talked to people, and the result is actually the same. Just like the incident in Pingchao. He went to talk to people in Pingchao, but in the end, the matter remained unresolved. This should not be the way. The education sector should not be so malleable anymore. It's just like during SARS, there was a surplus teachers, and you just lay them off. And you have no plan whatsoever when it comes to an increase in the need for more teachers. Frontline staff members are very frustrated and tired. When will this disaster end? Secretary, you've been saying that you've been talking to schools, and some of them accept the increase in allocation. I'm not going into detail. What about those who don't want an increase in allocation? Would you allow that to happen that you won't increase the number of students allocated and you won't increase the number of classes? Deputy Secretary. Well, a number of flexibility and flexible measures have been mentioned. There are a number of provisional measures, and some of them choose an increase in allocation. And that for us actually is the last option. What we do is, first, we look at the school net and schools in the same district to see whether there are vacant classrooms. Say, for example, in Tuen Mun, there are more vacant classrooms. So we can use that and increase number of classes. Another way is same district, different school net. In the past, we borrow school places of North District from Tai Po. And now for Yuen Long, there are two districts, there are two nets that needs an increase in number of allocation, because there is no more space for expansion. In Tai Po, after we've spoken to them, they accept an increase in allocation. Can I have more time? 15 seconds. In Kwun Tong, we heard that there were vacant classrooms. We asked, but there were only 2 or 3, and that is far from enough to meet demand. And after discussion, we agree, but they agree that there should be increase in allocation. Mr. Leung Kwok Hong. Well, I think the secretary is not the worst one. You came from human resources sector, not education. But how could you treat schools like this? They ask you whether there is room for discussion. They ask you whether it's possible not to increase the number of allocation. And you said that this is a temporary measure and it has to be done. That means it has to be done. I think you're using the usual tactics in human resources, not the way used in education, Secretary. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Leung. We deal with this issue from the perspective of the education sector. As the Deputy Secretary said, that increasing allocation is not the only option. We have explored many different possibilities. You said that small class teaching is a policy, but there needs to be flexibility. As a result, there is a need for increase in allocation. And you talk about temporary measures and also manpower arrangements. For increase in allocation, well, this will be a responsible approach. As a school head rightly pointed out, that well, if we build more schools, then at the end of 4 years, it will have to be closed. And some people mentioned about school closures that took place 10 years ago. I don't want that to happen. So that means school heads asked you for more allocation. As the Deputy Secretary said, that different schools have their own views. So then who are these 9 principals? Have you spoken to them? Secretary. My understanding is that they express no views when it comes to increase in allocation. What they are concerned is the deployment of resources and manpower. That's why I said that you came from manpower resources. How do you address their needs? Don't think that you are in a private company or in your own company that you have to think about cost all the time. We don't look at input and output, we look at outcome. You have to achieve your policy objective. Do you understand? Next, Mrs. Virginia Ip. Thank you. I thank the teachers, principals for coming to speak to us. I'm very concerned about small class teaching. But I would like to ask questions from a different angle, from the angle of a parent. Parent is also a stakeholder. Teachers play a very important role. I think small class teaching does not rely solely on whether there is enough classrooms or the number of allocations to each class and the amount of resources. I agree with Dr. Zhang. She said that it should be people-oriented. The focus should be on quality, not just quantity. So how can there be, what should be the reform? Say, for example, English. Well, I've heard from some graduates that they have maybe taught English classes in summer classes, and they said that because there was not enough time, and sometimes that they make grammatical mistakes. Chinese subject is the same. I heard that there is going to be standard texts used in Chinese teaching? And how can you improve the quality of teaching? I would like to defer to the deputy. Mrs. Yip is right. When small class teaching is implemented, it's not just linked to the number of allocation. As the secretary said, this is a method. The capacity of a class is smaller. We're talking about the design of curriculum and also the teaching strategy of teachers. They all have to complement one another. Starting from 2009, when we introduced small class teaching in phases, we attach importance on the training of teachers as well. There were sharing sessions among teachers. The basic is that there should be more interaction between teacher and student. It should not be one way, the conventional way. Because if it's one way, no matter how big the class or small the class is, the efficiency is still the same, or the effectiveness is still the same. The Bureau has also spoken to different training institutes. DS, I just want to ask you one question. For primary schools, there are small class teaching, small classes. You love tracking studies. Have you done any on the quality of education after small class teaching has been implemented? This will be the 6th year, and I understand that there are some study groups following the issue. I remember answering a similar question last year. We will look at the effectiveness. Next, Dr. Elena Wong. The Democratic Party supports small class teaching in primary schools. We hope that it will be extended to secondary school if it's successful. But we have to deal with the increase in type 2 babies coming to study to Hong Kong. And as a result, there is not enough school places. I object to increasing the class size from 25 to 30. You can't have a policy on small class teaching, but one that exists in name only. You doing it at the expense of small class teaching policy. Your logic is that just putting one more place at the dinner table when there is one more person coming to dinner. You have already pronounced the death sentence of small class teaching. You want to scrap small class teaching because it exists in name only. If 25 is enough, you increase it to 30. Later, when there are more type 2 babies, would you increase it from 30 to 35? You're the Secretary of the Education Bureau. You did not stick firmly to the policy on small class teaching. You think that you can sacrifice it. It is dispensable for the benefit of something else. You have deviated from this policy. And I'd like to ask, Kwun Tong is worried that with the increase in allocation, there is a possibility of reduction of class size. And I also like to ask, SchoolNet 72 in Yuen Long is Tin Shui Wai. It's also a dedicated SchoolNet for cross-boundary students. You said that the increase in allocation is SchoolNet 73 and 74. How come that for SchoolNet 72, you did not increase the number of places allocated? And please answer me whether this policy exists in name only. I'd like to say that we are implementing policy on small class teaching. Over 70% of them are 25 student class, and about 20% of them have got about 30 students in each class. For the remaining part, I'll defer to the DS. There are more vacant classrooms in Tin Shui Wai. That's why they lend school places to the other nets in Yuen Long. And for the other two nets, there is an increase in allocation. So there is no need for Tin Shui Wai to have more allocated places. For Kwun Tong, there is no case of a reduction in class. There are some provisional classes. So they have the total number of class divided by 6. And they take into account the number of P6 students leaving school and they do some math. So it's not what you have in mind, not reduction in class per se. Reduction of classes per se. Peter Zhang, I don't understand. Well, for a small class teaching, it's 25 to 30. How come there is a range? Can you find the same thing in any other countries? So you tell me, if it's a small class, it should be 25. You not give us a range, 25 to 30. And I think that, well, if it stays at 30 for now, you will just leave it. But I do think that the policy is to have 25 students in each class. You told us that small class teaching is a method, but then you also told us that it's a policy. How come? And I have a question for Principal Chan. Just now, the DS said that there are vacant classrooms in Kwun Tong. But there are only 2 to 3. But in the end, it's decided that there should be an increase in allocation and not an increase in number of classes. Who will take this first? Secretary?
I am the chairman. I'm asking the secretary to answer first. The small class teaching policy is not just about the class size, but also the management of quality. And this would include the teachers, whether they have been properly trained to tackle a teaching environment. There is a high degree of interaction. Sorry, Chairman, I don't want him to waste my time. If you do not have the right number of people, you cannot do everything that follows. You must be controlled by that figure first. Mr. Leung Kwok Hong, is not your time. Effective teaching does not depend on whether it's 20, 25, or 30. It can be arranged. Different school nets and different arrangements and different expectations, we can allow a range. That was not what we said, but this was supported in 2010. Deputation, Ms. Chan, I'd like to emphasize again. In Kwun Tong, there has not been comprehensive consultation. The DS said that there would be 1 or 2 vacant classrooms. That's not the case. On the 12th of March, the 32 principals were talking to the PAS, and we expressed that possibility that there would be some classrooms in certain schools, and we asked the Bureau to conduct comprehensive consultation, but there was no reply. And actually, as I was saying, in my school, there would be 1 or 2 standard classrooms that could be used. We put forward that request. We asked the Bureau to do comprehensive consultation, and then on the 23rd of April, there was the notice sent out to schools, and Kwun Tong was notified that we should have 30 persons in each P1. We have 5 classes, and then altogether, I would have 25 students more, adding up to 150 altogether. So why wouldn't you allow me to operate 1 more P1 class in the vacant classroom in my school? There should be flexibility. Well, I will give them time to respond when it comes to my time to speak. Mr. Wu Chi-wai. Thank you, Chairman. I wouldn't mention too many issues, but I think small class teaching has been an accepted, established policy. And you are saying that in Kwun Tong, in the next 6 years, there will be an increase in the school students of the right age cohort. In other words, the present phenomenon will be repeated for the next 6 years. You said that if you want to add extra classes, you have a problem of premises, and that is why you are going to carry on with this present phenomenon or problem for the next 6 to 7 years. My question is, there has been an increase in the overall population in Kwun Tong. Now it stands at over 700,000. How can you convince the education sector that the problem faced by Kwun Tong is just a temporary issue, but not a long-term issue? Secondly, even if this is an emergency, and even if you will be given a year to use the 3 vacant classrooms. You should actually start a school building problem so the problem will not continue. If you don't do this, say in Anderson, if there will be new population, then the problem will just become more serious. And the present worry affecting Kwun Tong, at least, in terms of class size, will actually mean some losses to be sustained by parents and students. Other districts may still benefit from small class teaching, but then Kwun Tong stands to lose. That is some kind of unfairness. How can you respond to that? Thank you for the question. If you look at the information we have supplied in the table, 2015-16, 4,900 for Kwun Tong, 2019 to 2020, 4,600. Even if we build schools now, before they are built, you will have to close them. Secondly, we have other means to tackle the issue. DS, would you like to say something? Chairman, please. Information we have from the CNS is that in July 2012 that was issued, and it is for 2012 to 2014, and also the planning department issued the demographics projection in March 2013. And as the secretary said, information at hand shows that the peak will start to drop in 2019. The member talked about development and population increase. Those have been factored in already, unless in the next census we will see changes. We will try to make use of different measures. It is not that we turn a blind eye to the school situation. In Anderson, there is a development and there is a plan to build a new school there. Next, Ms. Priscilla Leung. Chairman, we discussed small class teaching a lot in the last session because of the better quality of teaching. I have contacted the districts. Some of the renowned schools would beg for a place even if the class size will be 30. That is a fact. So in terms of districts and population, I believe there are imbalances. I would like the Bureau to consider this. Small class teaching is about quality and number of students and also resources, the aspirations of parents and the schools, and also transformation. In fact, I have suffered from that policy. My own school was closed under your policy. And then, in fact, I told you that if you closed schools, there would be a lack of places in the same district a few years down the road, and this is what is happening. Apart from resources, you also have to look at people's wishes. The 9 principals have said that this is against their wish. I know some schools which are expanding class size because people beg them for places. And my question for you is, how do you approach the 5 factors? In the next 6 years, how are you going to review the quality of teaching? In some schools, even if they have small class teaching, the quality of teaching still is lacking. How can you help them? How can you help them have diversified development so they can have different sources of students? And secondly, I'd like to ask a deputation. You call these classes so-called pregnant classes. Is it that you think that the majority of you is against large classes? First Secretary, we have not got a comprehensive picture of small class teaching because we are starting to have small class teaching in P6 the first time this year. Increasing the interaction is important, but what is more important is teachers' quality and performance. It has a crucial impact on the quality of teaching. We'll have to complete P6 and then we can have the whole picture. Mr. Leung, so-called pregnant classes. Let me give you an example. Like this year, a school has 9 P1 classes and then they will have to operate 9 P2 and then the year down the road they will have to operate 9 P3, and they already have 27 classes, and they may have only 3 more classes. And in the 4th year, how many P1 classes can they accept? When there are 9 classes in any one year, they can only accept 1 or 2 P1 classes, and there will be a big opportunity for them to cut class numbers in the end. Next, Fernando Zhang and then Dennis Kwok. Thank you, Chairman. I think it's not easy to understand the jargons used in the education sector. Increased allocation, decreased allocation, pregnant classes, what have you. I think it's not easy to follow these issues, but I think you're all experts, and I thank the deputations for coming, but I'm quite boggled. My understanding is that we have had small class teaching since 2009, and theoretically the class size should be limited to 25. Now all of a sudden we have an increase in P1 students, whether it be the effect of the year of the dragon or type 2 babies. In fact, the fertility rate in Hong Kong has climbed slightly in recent times, and perhaps urban renewal and housing development, etc., I think those might also have an impact on the issue. Now that you have had so many years in carrying out small class teaching and you have used the boundary of 25, but now you say in certain districts you can't abide by that boundary and you have to increase the allocation of students. Now, my understanding about increased allocation is that you provide fewer resources than if you were to operate extra classes. You said that you need vacant classrooms for extra classes, but you can have a flexible approach. As the principals said, they could turn multi-purpose rooms into classrooms. And you can be flexible with funding. Please be more generous. Why don't you go for the most generous approach? And I would say the small class teaching principle, so schools will have more resources and be left to their own devices. Some principals mention the so-called pregnant classes. I don't think that should be the case, because if you have an imbalance in the class structure, there will be a negative impact on the ecology and also development of that school. So let me put this simply. I don't really understand what you mean by increased allocation, etc., etc. Just go for the simplest approach. Give them the money, give them the manpower by going by the small class teaching funding principle, and then schools will make use of the resources to accept more students. Just don't force them to have an imbalance in class structure. Can that be done? Secretary, I'll defer to the DS. Chairman, in terms of resources, I think we have the same target. We put emphasis on the learning effectiveness of students. In that year, when we rolled out small class teaching, we said that if schools were ready and willing, then we would allocate 25 students to one class. We also provide extra resources if the class size is 30. We just go by the same methodology. No, I'm asking you not to go by the 30 class principle. Just go for 25 students in one class, and once that is exceeded, give them an extra class. Dennis Kwok and then Lam Tai Fai. Thank you. I think what Mr. Fernando Zhang is saying is that if you increase the class size to 30, you should proportionally increase resources. So the small class teaching policy will not be affected in essence. I have followed this discussion, but I find that the administration is lacking in sincerity in continuing with the small class teaching policy. I doubt whether you have the sincerity. I doubt whether you are happy to inject resources to preserve the small class teaching policy. You said that the increased allocation is the final measure. But then if you look at the end of 2013 and the vacancy rate in public sector schools, in Tai Po 16, Yuen Long 83, is it that that is a measure of last resort? Please respond. Thank you, Mr. Kwok, for your question. I said that typo was such that after discussion, the schools preferred increased allocation instead of borrowing places from other districts. That was the consensus in typo. Chairman, let me add. I think the member could see that there were vacant classrooms in typo, but they are found only in 1 or 2 schools. And other schools did not want to have these so-called pregnant classes and have extra classes in those 2 schools, and so they would like to have overall increased allocation. And then I was asking you, what kind of resources would you guarantee that actually schools could go on with small class teaching? P.S. I'd like to say that, in fact, we understand that members and the sector are asking for more resources. But let me say that we are following what we did when we rolled out small class teaching. It is not that we are leaving schools to fend for themselves. Right now, 75% of schools have small class teaching, and there was so much discussion in the council that even if schools were not ready, you should still give them the resources to make sure that teaching would be effective. And we are just applying the same thing to the present situation. You may say that the present situation is no longer the same. And in fact, when we talked to schools, we said that we would go by the present arrangement, but we understand the concerns of the sector. We know that there is going to be this long-term effect because you're affecting the so-called large classes. We'll take a comprehensive look and then we'll talk to the schools again. We promised that already.
As we all know, there will be an increasing student population. So you should allocate more resources to ensure that small class teaching policy will be maintained. So there will be an ever-increasing allocation of resources. Thank you. Now it's my turn. I just received from the Deputy Chairman, Mr. Kim Yun, his motion. And they've been distributed to members. And I would like to hear from the DS about what Miss Chan, the principal, said. Just now, the principal talked about the letters. I think it's a matter of timing. In December, we issued a school list based on the estimate at that time. It's not just about Kwun Tong. We asked schools about possible vacant schools and multi-purpose schools for conversion. What we got was that there are only 2 or 3 classrooms, so there is not enough. We also considered borrowing school places from neighboring school net. But once we do that, it will be a different district, and the students will come back to ask for school place again. So in December, the choice of school list was compiled, and in March, we got the actual number of students in central allocation. There is a slight difference, a slight drop compared to December. And we used a basis of 30 per class. Some schools asked to convert certain classrooms without accepting more allocation. This will be very unfair to other schools because in December we asked schools for their preference, and we can't allow them to change, or we can't allow certain schools to change. Maybe we will hear from the principal. Well, there is a convener principal law for Kwun Tong schools. I don't have any recollection that we've been consulted in December. That's why in the March meeting I said that if the Bureau could get a better understanding of how many vacant classrooms there are in Kwun Tong, it would be better. I told them I have no recollection that they've asked us in December. Perhaps I will defer to Mr. Law, our convener. On the 11th of December, well, prior to that, there were notifications given to Kwun Tong schools, and on the 11th of December, there was a meeting called. 32 school principals attended, and it was mentioned that there will be an 22 P1 class added to Kwun Tong district. There are a number of options mentioned, say for example borrowing schools from neighboring school nets, making use of remaining classrooms and changing the use of other classrooms, etc. There was no decision, there was no consensus during the meeting. On the 15th of December, which is a Friday, the Education Bureau faxed a sheet to Kwun Tong schools notifying us that there will be increased allocation. I suggest that you talk to each other after the meeting to narrow down the differences. Now it's my turn, Secretary. First of all, I would like to thank deputations for attending, for giving us your time. Bureau Secretary, you should understand that the community, teachers, parents, schools all support the continuation of small class teaching. We don't want that to regress. Perhaps there may be special reasons, some reasons coming up suddenly. As a result, individual schools may not implement small class teaching. And as a result, they may even need an increase in allocation or increase in number of classes. You have to take into account the capacity of these schools. Other than pressure on teachers, on manpower, you have also to take into consideration the hardware, the school premises, etc. You also have to understand that it's a trend to have small class teaching, a trend that you cannot reverse. You should not steamroll your way through. You have to make sure that there is a sufficient communication in place. Obviously, today we see that there is insufficient, ineffective communication. If you steamroll your way ahead, if there is inadequate communication, then there will be more dissatisfaction, and this will affect quality of teaching. I hope that when it comes to the policy, increase in number of classes, number of students, you have to put in place effective communication. Otherwise, there will be a lot of dissatisfaction, grievance, and irreconcilable differences. I've heard you, Chairman. We will step up our communication to make sure that it's effective. The principals have made themselves clear. You finished? Now I'll deal with the motions. There are two motions. We've had a lengthy discussion. We've heard from all who have attended, so I'm not going to have a discussion on the provisional motion. We'll put it to a vote. We'll put them to a vote. First, on the provisional motion of Mr. Kim Yuen. When you read the wordings of the motion, the panel asked the administration to reopen discussion with the school sectors in relation to increase in allocation. The other one is that this panel asked the Secretary for Education to abide strictly by the small class teaching, and the panel object to the administration's solution by increasing the number of allocation. Those who are in favor, please raise their hands. Well, maybe we should have a second first. But those in favor, please raise their hands. Those against, please raise their hands. Those abstain, please raise their hands. So this provisional motion is carried. The next one moved by Ms. Helena Wong, seconded by Dr. Fernando Zhang. Those in favor, please raise their hands. Please sit down as quickly as you can.
反對嘅
Those against? Those abstain? Priscilla Lang, you abstain? So 12 for, no one against it, and there is one abstention. So this motion is carried. That's the end for this agenda item. I thank you for attending. Deputations, if you have further submission, you may submit it in written form after the meeting. Sorry, Deputy Chairman, the meeting is not finished and I haven't finished speaking. You may also leave us your speaking notes. You would like to add something? The Deputy Chairman talked about reopening discussions with schools, and I said in relation to the allocation in 2014 that it's not possible because we have already triggered the allocation mechanism. So in relation to the motion about the increase in allocation in the future, but the motion has already been carried. Well, it's not very well worded because there is no mention of year. You should be more tolerant. Would you, if you would like to leave us your speaking notes, please put your name down so that we know to whom it belongs. Next item is the construction of an annex to Baptist Lui Ming Choi Secondary School in Sha Tin.
好，跟住而家咧，我首先咧想請
I would like to ask Mr. Kevin Yang, Undersecretary, to take us through the paper. CB bracket 4645/13 to 14 bracket 02. Chairman, we propose to construct an annex, a new wing to the Lui Ming Choi Secondary School. It's now in Lake Yun Estate in Sha Tin. It was built in the 1970s and it occupies about 4,000 square feet. It now has 30 classrooms. So there are only 20 classrooms, so they have a floating class system. With the class structure reform, special rooms and available rooms cannot cater for the needs under the new secondary structure, NSS curriculum. So we hope the members will support our proposal. On the 3rd of January this year, we consulted the Sha Tin District Council, the Education and Welfare Committee, which supported our proposal. If we get the support of this panel on the 4th and the 27th of this month, we will submit the funding application to the PWSC and the Finance Committee. With their approval, the work can commence in April 2017 for completion in September 2017. Thank you. Now we have a discussion. Let's see which member would like to speak. No one?
Wang Bích雲
Helena Wong, Fernando Zhang, and Kenneth Lang, and Deputy Chairman. 3 minutes, question and answer included. Ms. Wong, I speak in support of the proposal. My reason is that there are only 25 classrooms in this school. So for a long time, they've been operating with insufficient number of classrooms. This is a nuisance to both teachers and class and students. I hope that this project will be implemented as soon as possible. The Undersecretary, I thank member for her support. This is also our goal. If we get the support of the PWSC and the FC, we will be able to start the work at the end of the year. I would like to ask, this problem existed for a long time. How come you only come up with this proposal now? What is the problem? Was there a delay? No, it's not a matter of delay. When the school was constructed in 1970s, it was up to standard. But with more school intake, with more grouping and split classes under the NSS curriculum, say for example in secondary 4 to 6, there are more subjects to choose from. So there is a need for a new wing. Paragraph 5 in your paper, it says that there are 5 floating classes. As a result, there is not enough classrooms. They have to use labs and other special rooms. So how long has these 5 floating classes been in place? Why do you propose the construction of a new wing to provide more classrooms now?
Mr. Secretary, if you ask me in which year there was the start of this deficiency in classrooms, I can't answer you now. Please take up the answer. Thank you. Next, Fernando Zhang. I support the construction of the annex. Baptist Learning Choice Secondary School is a famous school and is very popular. Now it lacks space. From what I understand, this school was built in 1978. I'm a little worried about the existing facilities. Can there be barrier-free access in the existing building? I'm sure there will be that access in the new annex. But what about the existing school building? Is it a barrier-free school? If not, will you take the opportunity of this project to turn it into a barrier-free campus? Secretary. Chairman, in 1999, the school carried out some improvement works, including the retrofitting of a lift for those who have disabilities, and also the retrofitting of toilets for the disabled. Overall speaking, after that improvement exercise, we believe it has become a school that meets with standards. After we have this new annex, the toilets for the disabled will be moved to the annex building. The facilities will be further improved. So I can assume that the connection between the existing building and the annex will be smooth. In other words, there will be improvement to barrier-free access. Indeed, the two will be connected smoothly. The lifts that I mentioned will be continued. Dr. Kenneth Chan, Chairman, of course we won't object to improving school facilities, and therefore I don't really have any questions. I believe members will support it. The thing is, students have to continue to go to school while the project goes on. I have been in this school for a talk. So have you talked to the school how you can minimize the impact on students while construction goes on? Because the paper is quite silent on this aspect. Secondly, the project cost. Sometimes an approved budget will be exceeded and you need supplementary provision from us. Now that you are preparing for it and the project is going to cost $146.9 million, is that going to be quite accurate? Don't come back to tell us about rock layers, so on and so forth. I hope we all learn from experience and be more careful in drawing up the budget. On the 24th of December 2005, you came here to consult us already. Does it mean that this was first mooted in 2005? That was a long time ago. Can you clarify that? Please comment. I understand in Taiwan there was another school that asked for expansion time and again, and the administration reacted very slowly. So when was the first time the school applied to you for school expansion? Those 3 questions, please. Undersecretary. Chairman. In 2005, it was just a discussion of principles. There were no details. As to in which year Lui Ming Choi started to ask for expansion, well, this was a process. I would have to ask my colleagues whether there was a specific date. It's very difficult to remember a particular date. Well, call him after the meeting. Usually, people would moot the idea and then they would say, please think about it. I have dealt with such cases, and there was a lot of exchange of ideas over the years, but nothing came out of it. Well, in fact, there was this process. We, for example, considered redevelopment, reprovisioning, etc., etc. So when the annex was first mentioned, I think I would have to ask my colleagues. As for minimizing the impact on students, we understand. Apart from this school, there is another school next to it. So we will look at the timing of the processes. We understand piling is going to be so noisy. Well, he is asking you not to spend over and above the budget, and also don't take more time than you should. No, but actually Dr. Chen asked about the impact on students. As you know, we would like to have not so noisy procedures as percussion. And we understand also that the budget is going to be quite accurate. Deputy Chairman, the questions mentioned by other members are also my concerns, budget exceedance and also noisy processes, etc. The present proposal is to expand the school premises. I'd just like to say I support it. Leung Yu-chung. Chairman, nobody would object to this project, but our concerns include when this was first discussed. You said that there was a lot of toing and froing, and I think there has been some delays. My school, the school where I teach, was redeveloped 10 years ago. I don't think that was the only case. I don't want the Education Bureau to adopt this onion peeling approach. Please take a comprehensive review, and if schools do not have enough classrooms, please help them on your own volition. Chairman, it's a very troublesome thing to have floating classes. It definitely affects teaching. And we now have DSE, and we go for group teaching. So the more classrooms you have, the better. I'm asking you whether you would take a comprehensive look at all public sector schools in the entire territory. Just now, we had a discussion on small class teaching, and we know that student population is rising. Undersecretary. Chairman. We are always in dialogue with the schools vis-à-vis school premises. I don't think we are dragging our feet at all. We'll look at their actual need. We don't have enough school places in primary schools, but the reverse is true for secondary schools in recent years. We have been in constant contact with schools. We are not using an onion peeling approach. Rather, wherever we see the opportunity to help, we would go for it. Of course, Chairman, there is a process. We will talk about the design with the school concerned. We need to seek the funding. We have to be technically satisfied that it is feasible. But before you come to us for funding, how can you be sure there will be funding? And that is what I'm saying. I am saying that the process you adopt is too cumbersome and too complicated. I'm asking you to do projections. you should do the projections. If you know that a school lacks classrooms, you should do it immediately to help them build more classrooms. Just like this one, they have been lacking 5 classrooms all these years. Okay, no, I mean they should do it more early, at an early stage, because you should have known the deficiency of 5 classrooms much early on. Chairman, from the design stage, please allow me to explain a little. If we see a lack of classrooms, we would talk to the school to see what way would be the best to address it, and then we can make a decision, and then we have to talk to people nearby, the principal, the parents, the teachers, the students, etc. That must be the case. This kind of process is crucial. Miss Elizabeth Quat, I support the project. The school was built in the 1970s. Now it doesn't have a language room, a counseling activity room, etc., and plus the DSE or NSS. Now there is a gross deficit of classrooms. As our members were asking, you take so long to address the deficiency in one school. How many other schools are in this category? I mean, secondary schools that do not meet present-day standards. They don't have this guidance activity room. So why don't you give us a table? It's all right if you don't have the information at hand, but give us a table to tell us how many secondary schools cannot meet present-day standards, and will you open dialogue with them early, because you say the process is going to be complicated, since there is a lot of consultation to be done, including that with DC. Let us have a table so we know what kind of a problem we are facing. Under Secretary. Chairman, I wouldn't say that the schools are substandard. They met the standard when they were built. And we have been helping schools to expand all these years whenever there was the opportunity. As to whether students or schools will be made more effective, I believe the opportunity is there in many schools. What remains is how many of these projects have potential or feasibility, and how many should be given priority. I don't think we can provide you with that checklist. In other words, a checklist of substandard schools. Okay, fine. Even if you don't want to call these substandard, why don't you tell us what kind of facilities there should be in a secondary school and how many secondary schools do not have those facilities? I believe you should have that assessment. Under Secretary. Chairman, we don't go by a hard indicator to say how many classrooms, how many rooms there should be in a school. Our assessment is usually about the effectiveness of teaching and learning. Even if there is the deficiency of 1 or 2 classrooms or special purpose rooms, they can make up the deficiency by different means. In some schools will arrange teaching and learning in such a way to make up for the deficiency so that quality of teaching does not suffer. All in all, therefore, we believe, well, Chairman, is it that you only react to requests made by schools? Chairman, very often, this is a mutual kind of proposal. We would also propose what better ways there could be to operate a school. Thank you very much. I think all members have spoken. As the Undersecretary said, they will submit the project to the PWSC in June for endorsement. I'd like to confirm with members that you all support the project, right? So you would support the submission of the project to the PWSC as well. Thank you. Next item, a 36 classroom primary school in area 36 Fanling. That's in paper CB bracket 4645 bracket 03. Mr. Yang again, please. Chairman, we propose to build a primary school in area 36 Fanling for the reprovisioning of Tonghua Group of Hospitals Ma Kam Chan Memorial Primary School. The present premises Actually, the main building was built in 1984, occupying about 2,000 square meters. In 1999, there was an improvement project to be provided with certain facilities, but then the site is still small. And compared to a present-day school, the area is definitely too small. And the facilities in the new school are in the paper. On the 4th of March 2014, we consulted the relevant committee of the North District Council, and members of that committee support the project. If members today will support it, then on the 4th and the 27th of June, we would submit the project and the funding requests to the PWSC and FC respectively for endorsement. And we can start the project then in December this year for completion in October 2016. Great. We can go into discussion.
We have the Deputy Chairman, Mr. Kenneth Chan. 2 members, 3 minutes, question and answer. Deputy Chairman, I would like to refer you to the first paragraph. Purpose is to reprovision Tonghua Group of Hospitals Markham Chan Memorial Primary School, who is now accommodated in a substandard premises. In substandard Choi Yun Estate. How come the Education Bureau would build a substandard school? It's not precisely worded here. At the time it was constructed, it was up to standard. But if you compare to the proposed school, it would be substandard. Substandard as in today's standard. Well, we're talking about the secondary school. We're talking about it being substandard under the standard of current standard. And now it says that it's because it's substandard, there is a need of provisioning. When it comes to the secondary school, just now we asked how many secondary schools are substandard. We asked you for a list. If you can't come up with a list, then how come this Markham Chan school will be reprovisioned? I remember that I asked a question seeking a written answer about how many schools are currently substandard. I asked the administration for a list. In the reply, they did not give me an answer. They did not supply me with a list. And today in the panel, a similar question was asked. So I hope the administration will be able to give us the information. And as to how many primary and secondary school premises are currently substandard. Back in 2000, there was a Millennium School Development Program. For school premises constructed after year 2000, they adopt this standard. Prior to 2000, they follow a different standard, an older one. We're talking about 2 different standards at different times. Does it mean that the school simply can't operate or cannot provide effective learning and teaching? I understand perhaps the standard in year 2000 is a very high one. But when it comes to the Markham Chan school, it said it's substandard. I know that you're not talking about the year 2000 standard. You're talking about an acceptable standard. If you can qualify this standard, I hope that this will be conducive to our work. When we refer to substandard, we refer to the latest school construction standard. Next, Mr. Kenneth Chan. Mr. Yeung may remember that I mentioned a matchbox school premises. Say, for example, in Taiwan, this Sun Ngoi Hao. I've been following it up. On the 9th of April, I asked a question seeking a written answer. Well, between 1960 to 1960s, there are a number of small school premises in public housing estates. Altogether, there are 28 of them. Of course, we will support this proposal. We're glad that you make this proposal, but we're very concerned about those that have been forgotten. I hope that the administration will not talk about current standards and they are still up to standard back in those days when they were constructed. Don't talk to us about this, because we're talking about a standard that falls short, a standard that falls short of our expectations. So we ask about the number of schools that needs redevelopment, reprovisioning. We need a list, because the list will facilitate our follow-up work. If you said that last time the review was 2005, it was a consultation. It's been almost 10 years, and we're still wasting our time away. This will not be fair to the public. So I'd like to ask the Undersecretary, can you provide us with a list, Undersecretary? When we're dealing with schools, premises that have been built some time ago. And of course, there will be a difference between the current standards or requirements. We explore different options, say for example redevelopment in situ, reprovisioning in situ, school development programs, and just like the previous proposal when we add an annex to an existing building, or large scale renovation. Usually when it comes to redevelopment or reprovisioning, it will be done on the initiative of the schools. Now we talk about this proposal. Primary school in the area 36. We did not, at this moment, assign this to Malcolm Chan School. Schools that think they have a need to be reprovisioned, then they can make an application. There will be different considerations by different schools, say for example schools outside the North District. Through this selection process, in the end we have selected Malcolm Chan School. Well, I asked for the list and he talks about the case, and he hasn't actually answered my question. Dr. Fernando Zhang, we support the reprovisioning of the Malcolm Chan, TWGHS and Malcolm Chan School. As the Deputy Chairman said, there are a lot of schools who are substandard, especially schools for students with disabilities. We are concerned about that. We know that in Kai Tak, there will be a reprovisioning of a Poland Cook school, which is really substandard, as there is also another one. In Hongqi, there is another Hongqi school. Two special schools share the same school premises. That is far from satisfactory, and definitely it is not up to current standard. A number of us have visited that school. We saw how overcrowded it is. When it comes to special schools, schools for students with disabilities, especially for Sanguang School, could you introduce some measures to improve the situation? When it comes to this particular school you're talking about, we've been discussing with them about improvement measures. There was some progress. I did not ask for the latest situation prior to this meeting, but as far as I know, when it comes to adding facilities, well, we have reach some kind of consensus. When it comes to improving the school premises, it doesn't necessarily mean reprovisioning. We can put in place some improvement measures to improve the school. But we have to take into account the different needs of different types of schools and the individual situation of the school itself. We know about that. We know that there are limitations of the site. Addition to the school will not be preferred because improvement measures will cause nuisance to the schools, but we know that there are other school premises that have not been used fully. They are in the same district. So I would like to ask, when it comes to special schools, which are the ones that are needed to be improved, whether it's by way of reprovisioning or redevelopment. And of course, one of our main duties is to improve school premises. Well, and now it's my turn. Under Secretary, you used the word substandard. It may be misleading. When it comes to substandard, of course, I don't have in mind dilapidated buildings, dangerous buildings, or buildings with short piles. Well, say for example, for DSS school, the Lam Tai Fai's school, is substandard. It's smaller than a Millennium School premises, because at the time when a bridge was built, we carved out some of our areas to that. It was our school is smaller than DSS Millennium School premises. Perhaps, well, if you provide one basketball court, it's up to standard. But with reprovisioning, you provide two, or you provide a student activity room, or you will have a bigger playground. You move with the times. But if you say substandard, it may give the impression that there may be some safety issue, that it has to be demolished. So perhaps you will take this into account for the future when you choose this term. It's not, when you use this term, you don't imply that there is an issue with quality. Well, now, other business. Any other business? Deputy Chairman. I moved a provisional motion, and I would like to clarify. I'll give you 1 minute. Just now, the DS said that in the future, when it comes to increase allocation, then there will be a continuous negotiation. I wasn't talking about that. Talking about reopening negotiation, the negotiation done afresh to address the various issues. Maybe some of them are not related to increased allocation, say resources. Instead of continuous negotiation, there should be a fresh negotiation with the schools. So we need to notify the administration, since the motion has been carried, they should restart negotiation. Mr. Kenneth Chan, sorry, Chairman, just a quick word. In the first in the first discussion session, it was 2008 or something when the policy on small class teaching was endorsed. It was September 2008 or something like that, when the notice was served. It was notice number 9, 2008. They made it out. He made it out as if it had nothing to do with him, but he's responsible for it. It's stated very clearly that it was 25, but now he made it out to be 25 to 30. There being no other business, meeting adjourned.